Hey there, this is Josh.
And Carolyn.
With Homesteading Family, and welcome to this week's episode of the Pantry Chat, Food for Thought.
This week we're trying out something a little bit different, a little bit new here on the Pantry Chat. We're going to start a new series that we're kind of calling the State of the Homestead. In this series, we're just going to be kind of talking about what's going on around here and really diving into our thoughts about what's happening.
Yeah, a little bit more organic conversation with what actually is going on the homestead and extending that chit chat and that view into things that we give you guys, but maybe diving a little bit deeper to what we're really thinking about, sometimes wrestling about, and whatever else is going on.
So we'd love your feedback on whether you like it, what you want us to talk about, if you have any other topics you'd like to hear covered in the Pantry Chat. But yeah, I think this is going to be fun. I think in honor of kind of that extended chit chat, we should skip the chit chat at the beginning here and move right to the question of the day. And then we can kind of like extend the chit chat later. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
All right.
All righty.
Sounds good. Question of the day.
So question of the day for you is from Jenny Simmons.
Okay.
Came in via email, says, what would cause a pickle, especially the skin, to be bitter?
Oh, usually that means that you have a bitter cucumber. It's not usually the pickle itself that's causing the bitterness. It's the cucumber. Cucumbers have genes. They have bitter genes. And you can accidentally turn those genes on when your cucumbers get stressed during the growing process. We've done this. We had a lot of problems. I'm not going to look at him because he's going to make
I'm sorry,
me laugh.
I'm having a hard time. I'm thinking VeggieTales and having a hard time not picturing a pickle with jeans on.
We've had a lot of years of VeggieTales in our house. That's kind of funny. So we've actually had this problem for quite a few years in our house. When we grew our cucumbers inside I'm sorry, you guys. We kind of got the giggles today.
We said we were going to be a little more organic, so here we are.
You're getting the very real version of us here laughing over our coffee. And I've got tears actually rolling down my face from laughing. So anyways.
Bitter genes.
Bitter genes. We're back to our cucumbers with bitter genes. Turning into bitter pickles. And I was saying we've had this problem when we've grown our cucumbers in the hoop house covered with plastic. And what it's done is it has picked up the temperature too high during the day and then dropped it too cold at night and created this stress scenario for the cucumbers. Once a cucumber plant, once that gene gets turned on and they start going bitter, there's nothing in my knowledge you can do to reverse that, which kind of means you've pretty much just lost the whole plant for the year. So I have persisted, even though we've turned on the bitter cucumber gene, and ended up with bitter pickles, because that's what happens. Your food does not get better in preservation. It just is always a principle you have to start with. You have to start with high quality, great tasting vegetables, meat, fruit, whatever it is, because it's not going to get better during the preservation process.
So there's nothing you can do, is what you're saying, in the preservation process to deal with a bitter pickle.
Don't pickle a bitter cucumber, because you will end up with a bitter pickle. That's the answer.
There's a rhyme in there somewhere.
There's a lot of things here that we're just gonna
bitter pickles not being better.
So anyways, today's sponsor for the podcast is Azure Standard. And I'm really excited, as always, to get to work with companies that we have used and loved for
Absolutely.
years.
Long time we've been with Azure.
We really have. And something that I love getting from them is they have a new line. I mean, I say new. It's been out for 2 years now. It's new in the scope of preserving supplies, a new line of canning jars. And I'm so excited about this because, and any of you guys who lived through COVID as a preserver will know that canning jar supplies
Evaporated.
They evaporated then, But what I learned from that is that the other companies like Ball don't actually even release their half-gallon jars year round. They do one big batch that they make a whole bunch of, and then they kind of release them in the spring. And then as soon as the supplies run out, they literally don't make more until the next spring. And so if you're like me and you do a lot of storage of food in half-gallon jars, whether that's, we use that a lot for our dairy in the house. We use the half-gallon jar size. It's easy for little hands to pour instead of like those big gallon jars. And you can fit more in the fridge if you use half-gallon jars than you can in gallon jars, just the way they kind of go together. But also our freeze-dried food, we really use a lot of those. So I have been getting the cases of the Azure Standard half-gallon jars, but also all their other jars, and I'm really, really liking them. I'm really happy with those. Of course, Azure Standard also is our go-to spot for any bulk foods that we're buying, whether we're bringing in bags of flour or grains or anything like that, beans. We even get noodles bulk at this point, and store noodles bulk, all different types of noodles. And that all comes from Azure Standard. So right now, if you are a first-time customer to Azure Standard, you can use the coupon code Homesteading Family 10. Homesteading Family, all written out one word with the numbers 10 at the end, no spaces. At checkout for your orders of over $50 or more as a first-time customer, and you're going to get 10% off your order. This lasts until September 30th of 2024 this year.
Cool. I wanted to add in there from the farm side, Azure has a few things. What we use the most is their kelp, because finding good quality kelp can actually be very difficult. You usually don't have it in your local farm supply. And they have the Thorvin kelp, which is the really good quality kelp. We've been using that for, 18 years, 17 years,
long times for all of our livestock.
And since you're probably gonna order Azure anyways, it's a great place to get your kelp as well.
Yeah, and then we use the kelp
and your salt too, if you want. They've got Redmond salt.
We use the kelp for minerals for the animals.
Yes, it's an integral part of our mineralization. Wow, that's a big word this morning. Program.
Good.
Yeah. So
okay, so we're kind of backwards today.
Got through that. Thank you, Azure.
Yeah.
And we're finding our way through this as we're a little lost, a little silly, and don't really know where we're going.
We do too. We know where we're
going.
Good. It's
what you up to?
Relaxed. What we're up to right now is a whole lot of preserving. It is harvest season. It's actually, here we are, we're all bundled up because it's actually cold out right now, which is a little early. We're filming this the end of August. 43 and raining in August is not normal, and it's a little uncomfortable, even for cold. North Idaho and our northern weird weather. But hopefully we still have some heat coming back to us. It looks like it does. We're looking at like 90s for butchering chickens in a couple days. That swings the other direction. Kind of on a seesaw right now. But this weather is reminding us that fall is right around the corner. And so we're, we're here at harvest season. We're putting up a lot of stuff. We've had a not very good fruit year because of the cold, hard winter we had last winter. We just really, and it was late. We had a warming in February, and then we had like extremely cold negative temps after that. And we, just in our region, people lost trees that were 80 years old or had them severely damaged. We have an apple tree that we think is probably 80, 100 years old, and 3/4 of it died. Yeah. And it's a bad fruit year. Yeah. So very few tree fruits going on, although the berries are doing really well. And so we've been picking a lot of raspberries. Those are pretty much done now, but to try to fill out the fruit picture, since we're lacking apples, nectarines, pears, like all the other fruits that we would usually be bringing in either from our own trees. Oh, plums. We're definitely missing plums. Yeah, usually the plums are usually a mainstay no matter what the weather does. So either they're fruits that we'd be bringing in from our own trees or from local areas, local trees, people who have too much fruit or something. But being that that's not happening this year, we've been spending some extra time foraging for huckleberries and bringing in some of those wild huckleberries, because this is a pretty good year for them. Not phenomenal, but pretty good. Been a good year. Yeah.
We'll take the huckleberries. Love them.
So today we're actually doing huckleberry pie filling, which is really exciting. We're canning that. And we also were able to find some pears locally, a couple boxes. So every year we do our old-fashioned pear preserves in honor of Grandma Jeannie. They're kind of a favorite around here.
Preserves, yep. Very, very good.
Very
Probably
good.
the sweetest thing in the house. Except you.
Well, thank you. That might depend on the day. That might depend on the day.
You or the preserves?
Me. As far as the preserves go, we have actually, when we first started making them, we were making them according to Grandma Jeannie's recollection. And oh my goodness, they had so much sugar in them.
It was sugar with a little bit of pear.
Oh, it was like, I felt guilty feeding them to the family. But last year, Grandma Jeannie's now gone. We reworked the recipe and I cut it down to a low sugar recipe, but kept all the spices in, and nobody missed the sugar. It was so good. So I'm like, this is how we're doing it every year from now on. So we're doing a low sugar with Pomona's pectin, old-fashioned pear preserves.
Okay, people are going to ask. I think the recipe is somewhere.
I don't know if it is, but we'll try to get
we'll link to it if it is, or something.
We'll take some pictures while we're making it today, and
there you go.
Turn it into a blog post for you guys, because it is a favorite. It's something we really like. But we're also bringing in a lot of vegetables, and I have been thinking about this a lot. We have a lot of zucchini and summer squash growing. We had a little mistake in our planting this spring, which means we have double the amount of summer squash that we intended to have.
They ended up in the greenhouse with the melons, and they were supposed to be melons, but they got confused, and so. And they're also, I think, doing much better on the terraces.
They're doing very well. So we are bringing in huge amounts of summer squash, but I'm also looking at all the pumpkins and all the winter squash, and they are prolific this year.
Yeah.
There are a ton. There's a lot of plants out there. We put in more plants than we normally do, but there are a lot of plants out there. So I've really been thinking a lot about this and about the idea of shaping our diet around what grows well. And it's kind of a challenge. I mean, historically, that would be the norm.
That's historically what you would have to do. And then you're if you can afford it, buying in exotics, like honestly, tomatoes are
in North Idaho.
Well, in a lot of places, would be an exotic.
Yeah.
And so getting into what you're saying, yes, that would be very much the historical norm is you grow what you can grow. And that's about it.
We kind of in the United States, at least, have this very ubiquitous diet where it's like what I eat when I live in North Idaho is the same as what I ate when I lived in Southern California is kind of the same as what I ate when I lived in Tennessee. Like it's kind of, we expect to have the same kind of meals and have them look pretty much the same wherever you are in the country and wherever you are throughout the year, like seasonally. And when trying to make our homestead and our homestead kitchen and our homestead meal table replicate that actually creates a whole ton of extra work and a lot of stress.
Yeah, we're actually creating more problems for ourselves. And if I can go sideways just a little bit, if we're wanting to break free from a lot of these systems being dependent, right? A lot of us are here because we want some dependence from the centralized system, big ag, the grocery store, whatever. This mentality, we have to have this shift in this mentality. And it's actually a really good shift for where you're going with this, because we're actually, while having that mentality, actually working a lot harder.
Yes.
And when it comes to like, how do you get all this done? Well, you need to remove the places where you're working too hard. And this is a place that we work too hard.
It really is. And I think we found this in just trying, the tomatoes are our big example of this. Trying to figure out how to grow enough tomatoes, because the American average diet is kind of built around a lot of tomato products, really, whether it's your pasta sauces or even things like chili or, a lot of your standard meals which have a sauce or anything. There's a lot of tomatoes going on in all of that. And so in our journey, we're trying to figure out, wow, how do we get more tomatoes? How do we, stop buying so many tomatoes from the store?
That's been the journey the last several
It
years,
really
literally
has.
in the garden, is like working hard to figure out the tomatoes
Mhm.
and grow them well.
And we had a moment last year after like really dialing, like we are going to figure this out. And we put so much energy and time into those tomatoes. And they produced decently well. They weren't great, but in kind of taking stock at the end of the season, we realized this is ridiculous. Like, what if we change the paradigm and say, instead of trying to grow what we want to eat, how about let's try to eat what we grow naturally and what grows really easily?
Well, and being out in the garden here, we're working really, really hard. I mean, and it's like the crop getting the most attention daily, every day. And it's not that you can't grow them. We grew them and we got a yield. But then you turn around and you look at the carrots or the parsnips or the beets and other things, and you go, I haven't had to look at you all season, and you're beautiful and productive.
Yeah.
And for planting once and watering, and that's a pretty interesting paradigm shift to think about.
It really is. And I think it's reduced the stress in the garden this year. We're still growing tomatoes. We just kind of treated them like we're treating everything else for the most part. We kind of put them in and said, okay, good luck. Like, you're on your own. I hope you do well. And if you don't, we're not going to cry about it because we're not going to spend too much time on it. But here's the interesting thing. And I don't know, I haven't thought this through enough to think, is this true all over the place? But the things that grow really well here in North Idaho, we have a short growing season. The things that are growing really well here, we have our root crops. We have things like our brassicas, like our cabbages. And we have things like squash, like our winter squash. Those things are growing really well. And the interesting thing about them is pretty much all of those store themselves.
I was going to say, we have some other things that grow well, but those they grow well, and they do not take a lot of preservation energy or time.
They really don't. They go into crates at the end of the season, and they get stashed in the coolest non-frozen spot we can find, which is in the stairwell of the storm doors of our basement. And, maybe one day, we will have a root cellar, a real root cellar, but we still don't. So we're still
She's looking at me sideways, one day. Wink, wink.
That wasn't even sideways. I was just looking at you.
Okay, straight on, all right?
Straight at you.
When are you going to get this done?
Other priorities on the homestead. But, one day we'll have that, but we don't. But we just stash these things in damp, most of them go in damp sawdust or shavings, wood shavings, most of the root crops. And even the cabbages, like we just stick in that space. We put them on a shelf in that space and let them kind of sit there. The pumpkins and the squash just sit up in the dining room all season. Some of those last really well into the next year. So it's just kind of really taking this look at like, we could spend our whole life trying to grow everything and trying to preserve it all, just like to feed ourselves the ideal menu that looks like what everybody else is getting from the grocery store. We could work really hard and do that. Or we could make some changes to our diet and spend way less time both on the gardening side and the preservation side and still end up with great food, feeding us all season. And for me, I like gardening. I like preservation. I don't want to spend my whole life doing either of those things. I want to have time to be able to pursue other things, hang out with the family, enjoy time and not have this like stressful pile of tomatoes sitting on the kitchen counter going bad, waiting for me to be able to preserve them. And so I'm really contemplating that a lot right now. Like, what changes do we make to the diet that allow us to do it? One thing for me that's kind of a struggle is on the winter squash side, because I grew up and pumpkins were pumpkin pie. They were dessert.
Right. So utilizing them in the house, I think, integrating them. Because you have this mentality like the tomatoes, like we have to have tomatoes.
Right.
And so we've gone through this phase of like really working hard to make tomatoes work, and we're kind of swimming upriver against the current. And so now you talk about pumpkins where they grow really well, they're easy to store, But the challenge with them is you have a mentality of how you approach
Right.
pumpkins, how we use them. And I think we all do. You're the one trying to figure this out in the kitchen, but I'd agree with you. I tend to think of them like pumpkin stew. That doesn't sound so exciting. Pumpkin pie. Wow, that sounds great. But
Right.
we're only going to eat so much pumpkin pie. This thing grows well. So how do you integrate it into the kitchen?
And actually take the place
And-
of the other things that we're deciding not to spend the energy growing
Right.
so much of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think it's just a culturing our tastes in the household, trying new things. There have been pumpkin meals that I have tried that everybody has loved. There's a pumpkin soup I still hear about that I just roasted some pumpkins and threw it together in the blender really fast, like with the immersion blender.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that involves sausage and sage with the pumpkins, people seem to really, really like that. That's kind of a hit in the house. But, you know, it's still trying to find more ways of using these things and to start like wading in and putting them in front of the family so that our taste buds start to change. And that's kind of a slow process.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think you're tying into something key just to take it a little further. I know we don't have a ton of time left, and I think it's a great theme in thinking about systems and making this life doable, because it's a question we get all the time about doing it all, and then how do you do it? How do you make it work, and how do you make it happen? And I think something that you and I do that is just a part of the culture and our life is always looking at these things, or trying to. Sometimes, like the tomato is a good example of like really missing it for a while, you know, and struggling really hard against something, but trying to be open to looking at our systems and how do we create better systems, or how do we do things differently,
Right.
that create these efficiencies. That's what you're describing
really
with the
is.
food
Yeah.
and with the garden. But I want to just draw it out to the bigger concepts of the overall life, and how do you make this life doable in a modern world? How do you make the shift? And we've you know, I say this often in different, when I'm talking to different groups, you know, I don't know a homesteader that's not willing to work hard.
Yeah.
You
It's
know,
true.
everybody is willing to work hard. I think sometimes we're willing to work too hard,
Yeah.
and we don't always take the time to do the thinking and think about our processes,
Right.
and look for the efficiencies, or look for the improvements and the adjustments that make our processes better. And I know I'm been very guilty of that. And I love getting out there and doing the work. I love being in the pasture. I love working on the barn. I won't say I love the garden, but I like the garden.
Yeah.
And I love the soil. And sometimes you just get to work, and then we miss these things and we struggle with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've made it a pattern in our life to try to revisit and look at our systems and how we're thinking about things, and be willing to be challenged across the board.
Yeah.
Really. It's almost, I wish I could say it. We was reading an article on Elon Musk and how he approaches business, and this thinking of going back to and there's a term for it. I read a whole article on it in the Wall Street Journal the other day about, you know, kind of putting all the preconceived notions away when you're approaching a subject matter or a problem. And instead of, like, we usually build off of what we know and what's been done before us, which has value. I'm not saying you want to throw that out the window. But when we come back to something and come back to its base, to its root, and look at it and, like, what's the purpose of this thing we're doing, this job, or what we need to get done, and then start to evaluate systems and how we're doing it from that angle, and less like on how we've done it before or how somebody else has done it, it opens the doors to new solutions.
It really does.
That helps us improve our systems and help us find efficiencies, so that we're wasting less of our effort and time, which is really, really precious. Again, especially homesteading in this modern world where we've got jobs, we've got lots of other things to do. We're not just homesteading.
You know, it goes back to that story that you hear the anecdote you hear every so often about the guy who every time he would get a leg roast, he would cut off a certain part of this leg roast and then put it in the pan. And when somebody asked him, why are you doing that? He said, well, I don't know. That's the way my mom always did it. And so they asked Mom, why do you do that? Why do you cut off that part of the roast to get it into before you put it in the pan? She said, I don't know. That's the way my mom always did it. So they went back to Grandma and they said, Grandma, why did you cut off that part of the roast to get it into the pan? And she said, oh, because my pan was too short. It wouldn't fit. So, it's just like people were just doing what had been done before without really understanding the purpose of it and the reasoning behind it, and without thinking about it and going, there is zero benefit to me of doing this thing. If I did it a different way, it would actually help me more, because we're just so ingrained to go back and like do it the way it's been done. And so, yeah, going back to those principles of like, why are we doing this in the first place? And, how can we shape this to best serve us?
Right.
It's really important.
Well, hey, this was a cool talk. I really enjoyed
cool
this.
Yeah.
And we're running out of time, but I want to say this idea of what we just talked about sharing these kind of concepts, well, we didn't really know where we were even going to go with this in this pantry chat. It really harkens back to the reason why we started the pantry chat in the beginning.
That's right.
Because we were finding that there were things that were very hard to cover in just a how-to video.
Yeah.
Out there on the homestead, which obviously are the things we generally do the most over time, is just trying to give you guys good knowledge. But we realized we needed a different format to talk about things that just you don't really talk about them very well in a how-to. So I think this is a great example of what's possible, and even the heart of why we started the pantry chat so many years ago. Yeah. And this was fun. So we'd love to hear from you guys. Was this valuable to you? Did you enjoy this conversation? We enjoyed it, but we're here to bring you value. And so let us know what you thought, if this kind of conversation was helpful, engaging.
Yeah, definitely. If you're watching on YouTube or in video anywhere, go ahead and drop a comment down below. If you're on podcast, you can always, always, always go leave us a review. We really appreciate podcast reviews. They really help to let the algorithm pick up the podcast and get it in front of more people who might be interested in this sort of thing, so it reaches more people. But yeah, definitely give us your feedback, because we'd love to hear from you what you guys are thinking about too.
I want to give a little plug
for
the upcoming Traditional Skills Summit, because what we were talking about today is very central to the entire summit. The theme is freedom, and it is really, well, we'll be exploring a lot of aspects of freedom. It's freedom from these centralized systems, these big systems that don't have our interests in mind, that we want to find pathways to break free from, kind of like we were talking about here. We've got folks like David the Good's going to be talking exactly about gardening and getting freedom and gardening in this way, and thinking about it along with a whole lot else that you can just, we'll drop you a link. You can go check it out there. It's free, week long. Carolyn will be there. I'll be there. Joel Salad and Sally Fallon, David the Good, a whole lot of people.
Oh my goodness.
It's gonna be really fun. Those of you that have been there, you know how great it is. If you haven't signed up yet, check the link. If you haven't before, go check the link, sign up, and we'd love to see you there. Good event that's gonna help us learn how to take further steps in breaking free, improving our systems, and looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's exciting. Yep. That's a cool event.
Absolutely.
So it'll be fun.
Cool. Anything else?
No, I think that's about it. We didn't really hear what you're up to. We'll have to cover that in the next state of the homestead.
Absolutely. But that's the point of these, is to go where they go and hopefully get down a few layers. So
all right.
Loved it.
Sounds good.
All right, you guys.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Pantry Chat, Food for Thought. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review.
To view the show notes and any other resources mentioned on this episode, you can learn more at homesteadingfamily.com/podcast.
We'll see you soon.
Goodbye.